Hello. Hi,
Hello.
everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Yes. I know we're starting just a couple minutes late, but it's great to see everybody. Should we go around the room and say who we are and what we do and all that?
Sure.
Yeah, why don't you call out people because we don't know what around the room
Sure.
means.
Right.
Okay. I'm going to go kind of around what I see on my screen here. I've got Brandon. You're at the top left. So can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, so I'm Brandon Weston, author of Ozark Folk Magic and the Ozark Mountain Spellbook. And I'm a healer, folklorist, and writer in the Arkansas Ozarks, but studying Ozark folk healing and folk magic practices.
Love it. And Pamita, you're kind of you're Brady Bunch square this way. So.
Hello, everyone. I'm Madame Pamita. I am a Ukrainian diaspora witch. I teach. I am an author. I've written 2 books for Llewellyn. Have a third coming out later on this year. But the Book of Candle Magic and Baba Yaga's Book of Witchcraft, which is the one we're probably going to be talking about the most because that's that Slavic folklore, Slavic magic. And I'm in Los Angeles, California, and I have a shop called Parlor of Wonders, which you can find online at parlorwonders.com.
Fantastic. Your covers are always so pretty. I love that.
Thank you.
Lilith, I saw you dancing. You're kind of down this way on me. So how about you?
I was like, I don't. Of course, people do go both ways. I'm Lilith Dorsey. I am a voodoo priestess, a filmmaker, a dancer, an author. This was my most recent for Llewellyn. I know it's backwards and upside down, so there you go. But I'm so excited to be here. I think this topic is so important, and people sort of sloughed it off. I have an anthro degree, so folk magic used to get sloughed off, but I think it's very important, and I love everybody on this panel, and I'm excited to get started.
Love it. Yes, we do seem to be having a little bit of a renaissance, so that's a good thing. Byron, what about you?
Hey everybody, I'm Byron Ballard. I'm here in the mountains of Western North Carolina, where my family has been since about the mid 1600s. So I got some gnarly deep roots that I can't seem to pull out. Every time I want to move somewhere else, I get called back here. So I'm here for the time being and forever, apparently. I've done a lot of writing about Appalachian folk magic. I travel a lot teaching about it. And I've got a brand new book called Small Magics that's coming out from Llewellyn in September. And all the info on that hit today, the cover and the pre-orders. So I'm a little bit hysterical, just to be honest, because I've been all over my socials trying to get all that stuff done. So I'm so glad to be here. I think of all of you, the only one I've actually met is Lilith, but I have such respect for every one of you and love you so much. And I feel very honored to be part of this.
Well, I think we're all kind of fans of one another, just because we're all, interested in so many of the same things. And as Lilith said, it's something that maybe didn't get a ton of attention up until fairly recently, even though it's something that a lot of us have been very interested in or practicing for a a long time. If you hear weird noises in the background, my dog is drinking water and he's very loud, so I apologize. Yes, and I think Llewellyn. Oh, I probably should say who I am. I'm sorry. I'm Cory Hutcheson, author of New World Witchery, host of the New World Witchery podcast. I'm a folklorist and researcher studying folk magical traditions. I do practice folk magic, sort of from within a folk Catholic context, and then from the Upland South region as well, which pulls from a little bit from the Appalachians, a little bit from the Ozarks, a little bit from the deep South as well. So it's just kind of it's a crossroads, as one might say. So that's kind of where I am. It's lovely to be here with all of you. So lots of great questions coming up, but it looks like we've got kind of our guide question, which is how exactly do each of us define folk magic? And I'm thinking maybe we'll go reverse and start with Byron this time.
Oh, okay. Well, I always hesitate to use the word magic around the people who are traditional Appalachian practitioners because so much of what we do comes out of Protestant Christianity. And a lot of those people are real uncomfortable with the word magic. So I tend to talk about healing folk ways if I'm talking to people like me, because that's something everybody here understands. And it takes away that the scary piece of magic for some of those folks. And also, if I'm talking about my neighbors who are indigenous people, if I'm talking to my Cherokee friends, I never use the word magic because it makes them very uncomfortable. So I talk in terms of folk ways. And so that encompasses everything from healing to finding a bow to figuring out what the weather's going to do, to knowing how to cook a really decent pile of dry beans. It's a really, really big thing to talk about.
Mm. I love that. And I like the way that you talk about that as something that sort of interlaces so many different aspects of our lives. It's not compartmentalized. I think
Well,
many
you
of us are
got
gonna,
to, yeah, you got to in a place like Southern Appalachia where there's so many influences and so many kinds of people. And if you want to be a good neighbor, which is something we kind of pride ourselves on, it's important to know what you can and can't and should and shouldn't say.
Mm. Lilith, what about you? How do you define this?
Oh, it's so hard. I feel like I want to use Gertz's definition of culture. It's that complex whole, right? It's everything that we do, that it's sort of in our blood, in our souls, in our minds, that like we knew both intuitively, we were taught by the people who raised us growing up, that, and it works. That's where I sort of place it. It's just those things. And I like Byron's definition because there are those things that happen in the kitchen. There are those things that happen in the garden. There are those things that happen just around the home and the hearth that help us get through our day in a most necessary way. So that's kind of how I define it. I mean, I think everything is magic. And the more I unpack it, the more I unpack what I was taught growing up, the more I unpack what I was taught even in academia. It really is all magic because it produces such splendiferous and divine results for us. And that's where I place it.
I love that. I love it when you answer a question because I get both the practitioner side of it and then you have the anthropologist hat on too. So we get like the rounded. I love it. So
I'm glad
Rita,
you appreciate that. People always want me to take it off. Like I'm in a documentary. They're like, you're just a witch now. And I'm like, screw you.
No, that could be many things. Pamita, what about you? How do you define folk magic?
Lilith's like, you don't know me, right? When they
right?
say that. For me, it's the people's magic. You know, my grandparents on my mother's side never learned to read or write. They learned everything in oral tradition. They passed it on to their children and to me, their grandchild. And I feel like this is empowerment and power to the people. That's what I think of when I think of folk magic. It gives power back to the people rather than a pope or a metropolitan or some person who's up on high being an intermediary. It brings it back to the power that you have within you. And I think that's the thing that I absolutely love about folk magic.
Mm-hmm. I love that. It makes me think of there's a definition of folk from folklorist Alan Dundas where he says, who are the folk? Well, among others, we are. So it's the sense of like the communities that we belong to and that bind us together. And I think you cover that beautifully. Brandon, what about you? What is folk magic to you?
Well, I definitely understand what Byron's saying because Ozarks, it's very similar. If I'm talking to people over a certain age, I don't say magic. I don't say folk magic. And also, I mean, even just when I'm talking to people in general, sometimes I'll use folk magic, but folk magic is to me, an academic term. And for me, the folk magic that we are talking about when we say folk magic is the magic of the folk, the magic of the people. It's about the community roots. It's about how all of these things sort of interlock. So the practices of one family that support another family down the road, the practices that help us support each other. And I think that is sort of at the heart of the folk magic, even though, magic is a very complicated and controversial term in the Ozarks. But essentially, from my perspective, what we're talking about are the practices that balance our own lives and then allow us to balance the community and the world around us.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, we have somebody who made a comment in our chat that said something about it's interesting how we shift language for different community interactions, and I think we're hearing that's true. As several of you have said, when you're talking to certain people, you're not going to use the word magic, but maybe the word wonder or miracle might pop up, right? Or ways, we might say it's just the way we do things, right? And that, I think that works too. So we just, because we're part of the communities that we're practicing in, we know how to talk to those communities, and that's a part of it. So, yeah, beautiful. And that kind of leads us to, we've got our next question here, which says, we've all mentioned, for example, ancestors. Do we have to follow the traditions, or do we need to follow the traditions of our direct ancestors? Or, how does, for example, something like the genius loci, spirit of the land, impact practices and traditions? And I don't know, I'm just going to throw a dart on this one. Lilith, we're going to start with you on this one. How about that?
Okay. I got land, I got water, I got land, I got these things going on. No, I think that's interesting, because I grew up in New York City, and I've been here in New Orleans since the beginning of the pandemic. I was working here and coming down 5-6 times a year, so I moved. But I think that here is a really good place to think about, like, oh, what happens if I don't pay attention to the spirits of the land? We're underwater. We've, had 3 tornadoes in the past as many months, So I think that if you're not paying attention to who came before, for us, it's the Chickasaw and the Choctaw. And we talk about a city that was originally called Bulbancha, which meant many tongues. So it's like there was always a whole bunch of different people coming here and sort of trying to find their own niche within the culture. As time progressed, then it was Spanish or French or whatever, and a whole bunch of Africans and Haitians and Irish and all of that. So we've got such a blend here. For me, it's not just honoring the people that came here for, the hundreds and hundreds of years before I got here, but just honoring the actual non-human spirits of the land as well. And how do I jive with that? And that's going to be something, even though they're both cities, that's going to be something that's very different in the middle of New York City than it is here in New Orleans, which is way more influenced, I think, by the actual physical topography of where I'm living. So that's important. But what I say in my tradition is ancestors first, last, and always. Like, I would not be here if they were not here. And what I tell my students is we get up every day and we honor them because they know what we're going through. Oh my gosh, plagues, famine, all of this, they had to deal with that. I grew up hearing my grandmother talk about the 1918 pandemic, where she was, cooking a chicken dinner at 2 years old for her entire family, so it's like, okay, we got to feed everybody. We got to keep it together, and I think that still drives me in a lot of what I do. And I'm so grateful and thankful every day that they were here and did it before me, and they can help me get a leg up on doing it today.
I love that. That's beautiful. It makes me kind of think of something that I've sort of observed in different folk magical practices, which is the idea built from the ground up. So your ancestors are in that ground, right? They are part of that earth, and the plants that you're using, the animals that you're using, they all are from that earth. And I think that you kind of tapped into that with your answer there, Lilith. That's really beautiful. Brandon, what about you?
I think from my own personal experience, and then also just connections to other Ozarkers, we've only been in the Ozarks for about 200 years. I have ancestors buried all across Appalachia and all across Europe. And so from an Ozark perspective, the ancestors are in this sort of timeless other world that we can access wherever we are. And so for me, having a connection to the ancestors, that I can go visit in cemeteries and things like that is important. But even beyond that is this sort of foundational connection to the land and to this sort of double the other land or the other world on top of that. And having a connection to this land in particular, I mean, at one point it was survival. If you didn't have an equilibrium with nature, you wouldn't make it through winter, and so for Ozarkers early on, and then hill folk that go back to Appalachia, it was survival first. And so maintaining a good relationship with the land, no matter who you are, was first and foremost that importance. But that, even though we don't have the same sort of survival needs today on the land, that is still a foundational part of the practice, is this connection to the seen and the unseen on the land. The seen, the roots, the physical roots, but then also the metaphysical roots that connect us to the land, but then also those roots in our ancestors, wherever they came from, in that sort of spiritual place that we can access through dreams and through trance and things like that. And so for me, people always ask, I bet where all your people are from. No, I don't. I know where a lot of my Ozark ancestors were from, but I did genealogy work in my own family and point to a European country, and I have family from there. And so for me, ancestry sort of goes beyond just the physical location. It takes into consideration the physical location, but there's something else there. There's this sort of these spiritual threads that sort of connect, that go beyond just location.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point about kind of the way that it webs out and touches on so many different influences and pieces that come together in us. Like we are the newest assembly of a puzzle in some ways. There was a really good point raised in the chat where somebody mentioned that they were adopted and they don't have any idea of who their actual ancestors are. And I would say, ancestors are not just about a DNA line that you share. It is about a community that you belong to. It is about the people. They can be teachers that were influential when you were young. They can be the person down the street who always made sure that you got in your door safely after school, or, it's the people that belong to you and to whom you belong, I think. So love that. Pamita, what about you? Role of ancestors, role of genius loci or place for you?
Well, one of the things that's very interesting about my own Slavic magic practice is that for Ukrainians, we see what's happening in Ukraine right now, where there's a huge migration of people having to leave, being forced to leave. This is very, there's a lot of loss that happens. Not only, of course, there's loss of community when that happens, because one community that has grown up over a long time has to go, this one goes to Poland, this one goes to the States, this one goes to the other side of Ukraine. So you lose these very unique individual regional practices because they get scattered all over. What happened during the Soviet Union times in particular is when the diaspora Ukrainians left in the late 1800s, early 1900s, many of them migrated to the States, to Canada, Australia, and to other places. When Soviet Union came in and suppressed all kinds of cultural things as well as religious things, it was only the diaspora Ukrainians who were able to, or the ones that were super remote, who were able to carry on magical traditions. For example, peslanki, which are the talismanic decorated eggs, batik eggs. Those traditions were lost in much of Ukraine during the 80 years of Soviet rule. And it was the diaspora Ukrainians who were able to freely practice in the States or in Canada or Australia or in other countries, who were able to then reteach these practices to Ukrainians. We were almost like this, I feel like this little amber holding the insect and able to bring that back to the land. So I feel like each of us, people in the audience, each of you here are carriers of a tradition that our ancestors have given us, and we're able to share that through our books and through talks and things like that, and teaching and all of this. But this is so important, so important. So when we land on a land, of course, we honor the people of the land, but I also think it's equally valuable that we are retainers and we're each a library. Each one of us, not just us as the writers, but everyone in the audience, is a library of knowledge within you, of your folkways that your parents taught you, or that you learned from your community, or that you've learned from reading or studying and doing anthropological research like Lilith. So this is so important. And I wanted to just share that one little bit because it's very highlighted for, people who are forced to leave their land and forced to leave their communities. And we are seeing this happening in real time in Ukraine right now, and how devastating it is, but how important it is that we all are these little time capsules that are carrying this info,
Yeah. I love that. It makes me think of your discussion of the diaspora. It makes me think there's a book by a researcher named Robert Dorsey called Madonna of 115th Street, where he talks about the Italian American diaspora and how, they came here and they didn't have the graveyards of their predecessors to go and celebrate in, and so they had to, and so you had people from like Tuscany, people from Napoli, all kind of merging together, and they were trying to piece together the traditions that they had. And they couldn't do it like nobody had the whole tradition, but through connection and community, they were able to preserve so much by doing that. So I love that point. I love that the way that you phrased that and put that together. Byron, what about you? What do you think?
It is so hard for me to separate my ancestors from the land because we've been here for so long. So I don't try to do that. I just honor the fact that they were here and are here still, so that in October, when I visit the cemeteries, I visit 6 cemeteries within about 15 minutes of where I live in downtown Asheville, and so that I can spend time with them. So, my heart goes out to all the people of Ukraine as this thing rolls through. The other thing I want to say about the land first is that I stand right now, or I sit in my kitchen, in unceded Cherokee land. And I think it's important for us to remember, as several of you have said, that, yeah, my people have been here for a long time, but before my people were here, other people were here. And the other people who were here, they didn't give up their land willingly. And I think it's important for a lot of us to understand that. And if you are part of a great in-migration, whether it is recent, so that we have a huge contingent of Mexican and Nicaraguan people here, and a lot of Protestant Christian Ukrainians, which is a really interesting thing. So to hold that, both the ancient diaspora and the more modern diaspora, the thing that holds those beings here is the land. And I used to be very arrogant and say, these are the oldest mountains in the world. They are some of the oldest mountains in the world. And because of that, the energy here, people feel like it draws them in. And yes, there are what some people would call non-corporeal energy beings. There are spirit folk here, obviously. They're the spirits of former humans, but there's also the other spirits of the land. But in addition to that, there is a spirit of the land, of the mountains. And sometimes she is referred to by people as Mama Appalachia. And it's just the sense of what the mountains are and what they have been and what they ultimately will be that a lot of us hold very close to us. But the ancestor piece is interesting to me because for so many people who are from the West, ancestor veneration is a fairly new idea. And we are only now figuring out how to do that. And to piggyback again, I think, off what Pamita said, is that there are people who don't have all the pieces of a folk way. They have a piece here and a piece here and a piece here. And the more we talk about the things that we and our families do, the more likely we are going to be not only to heal some of those family traumas that we carry down with us, but to open up the concept of family beyond our bloodline. And I think that's imperative for all of us when we're doing ancestor work, is that, yes, if you're adopted, you have 2 sets of ancestors. You've got your blood ancestors that you probably don't know, but then you've got the ancestors of the people who are your family of love. And then in addition to all that, we've got the people we choose as our ancestors, people who inspired us, people who we loved from history or even from mythology. So it creates this incredibly beautiful and diverse web that all of us can find a piece to attach to.
It's beautiful, beautifully said. And I love the point you make about we open it up beyond just one definition of ancestor. There was a question in the chat that was talking about, what do you do if you're one of these diasporic communities, or you don't have this connection to the ancestors, you don't know where to begin? How do you start making those connections? And I think you kind of hit at a really good point there, which is you start with the communities that you do know, the communities that you do belong to. And we're all members of more than one folk community at any given time. We're at least one, probably 3, 4, 5, right? That can be a folk community that's a particular physical region, can be specific, ethnocultural region in some cases. And sometimes it's literally, like you said, the chosen family. If you're a member of, for example, the LGBTQIA community, there is a whole folk tradition that you can kind of build from within that as well. So there's so many communities we can belong to that I think that's really beautifully said. Now we're getting close on time. Were there any additional questions? Let's see. I'm going to try and scroll back up and see if we had some.
Llewellyn had a question, a good one. And
what was that one?
It says, folk magic for us whose families emigrated away from our home countries generations ago. Maybe we've lost touch with our roots and folk ritual. Do you have suggestions on how we get back in touch, being authentic without appropriative behavior?
It is a good question. Do you want to field that one? You found that one, so I'm gonna put it on you to do that one first.
Well, I think you want to participate in the community, So if I can speak for the Ukrainian Slavic community and the displaced Slavic people and the people who are Slavic descent who've been here for generations. You go in and you don't go and just take the magic out or take the folk way out, but you participate in the community. For me, that means raising funds and helping Ukraine and getting involved in my the Los Angeles Ukrainian Culture Center and supporting the arts and supporting these things. So it's investing in a community, not just taking. I say simply, maybe that's a simple way of putting it, but that's how you it's more than just a costume that you put on. It's understanding in the food, the art, the music, the language, the whatever you can participate in that isn't quote unquote magical will still be magical. Everything is magical, right? But these are things that I think really give richness to your experience. So I don't look at Slavic magic as a closed, for me, I would say it's not a closed practice. I welcome people, but to come in and participate in all of it. Mm-hmm. Eat the food, learn the words, support the causes, connect with the people. Don't just go, I'm going to go and hang out with Baba Yaga and that's all I'm going to do or whatever, right?
Right. It's not a buffet where you can just choose to eat the salmon and that's it, right? Like you got to sit down at the family table for that.
Yeah.
In my writing, I refer to that as cultural strip mining. When you go in and you take what you like out of a culture, but it leaves the culture bereft because you don't add anything back to it. Yeah. And we see that again and again in Appalachian culture. So suddenly everybody loves bluegrass, but they don't love real traditional bluegrass. They love the way it's been homogenized in some way. Mm-hmm. Yes, participate in cultures, love cultures, and figure out how you connect, what it is that make you fall in love with Baba Yaga. Is it because she's the wild woman of the woods and you're the wild woman of the woods too? And so you want to really embrace that? Or is it something deeper about that culture that you really, really connect with?
Yeah. I think one of the things, I've been around and been a witch long enough that I remember in the 80s when we had, here are all the goddesses and you get to play with all the goddesses of every culture. And we didn't know any better. Now we know better, so we can do better, right? That's how I feel. Like we can always do better. We don't have to feel beat ourselves up because we didn't 20, 40, 60 years ago do these things, but we know better now. So yeah, that's what we do,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Lilith, I know that you've written about some of these traditions that require things like initiations to get into, but I've also really appreciated that you say that doesn't necessarily mean that they're off limits to people either, right? But there are ways that you must participate, right?
No. I mean, I think for us, yes, it's an initiatory tradition, not necessarily a closed practice, but there's divination, there's working within a community, working within a family. But my best advice, though, for the person who's trying to reconnect and doesn't really know how to reconnect, I have to go back to Alejandro Jodorowsky. He's one of my favorite. I got to meet him, and somebody said, how do we reconnect? And he said, go get a bunch of dirt from your homeland, put it in a box, crawl in the box, close the top of the box. Like, and that's because, again, you're actually reacting on it. You know, I had a friend bring me some dirt from Ethiopia, and then 5 years later, somebody came to me trying to reconnect with their Ethiopian ancestors. And I was like, wait a minute, I have a bunch of Ethiopian dirt over here on the shelf, you know, and she used that as part of her rituals, and ended up going to Ethiopia the next year to sort of see it all for herself, even though that part of her lineage was completely closed off to her before. So I think we need to take action, but also respectfully taking action. You know, if you're going to get the dirt or the water, leave offerings, you know, don't be asking for stuff. You just met these people, you know, just try and connect and understand what that means for you.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you don't just like show up at the relative's house and say, I need $500, right? So
No.
you don't do
My
that.
relatives, you get shanked.
So good.
True.
Yeah. Brandon, did you have any suggestions, diasporic communities, ways to reconnect?
Yeah, so I think community, being involved with the community, I think that's at the top of my list. From an Ozark perspective, there's a lot of things that you can just sort of get through observation, but these practices were born from necessity. And so if you don't have a connection to that community, if you don't have a connection to why the practices were created in the first place, then you can perform the practices, but they might not resonate. They may not have that deep sort of connection. In the Ozarks, every practice is a spiritual practice. There's nothing that's mundane. And so having a connection to the community and to the folklore and to why we do the things that we do is very important. And this is not a closed tradition, but it's a tradition that deserves the respect and deserves that sort of community engagement. And then just kind of going back to the ancestors, and, you know, a lot of us don't know even where to start with certain practices or heritage practices or things like that. And so I always tell people, you know, well, what do you want to do? You're an ancestor too, to somebody that comes later on. And so all of these practices have an origin point. Our ancestors, there are practices that were new to our ancestors, that our ancestors developed for themselves. So we have an opportunity to work from tradition, but then to evolve the tradition as well. And so I always tell people, you know, the best way to honor your ancestors is by living a good life. You are the distillation of your ancestors. So if you take care of yourself, you're taking care of them. And so at that point, you know, we don't need to know all the details. And sometimes we can really get lost in the details. And when really what we need to do is we need to take care of ourselves and our communities. And by doing that, we're taking care of the communities that exist in the afterlife, and that sort of thing. So,
Yeah. Yeah, somebody made the point about, you know, one of the things that we do when we're connecting with ancestors, we bring a gift, right? We bring a gift to connect. But sometimes that gift is learning the language, right? Or sometimes that gift is learning the stories of a particular community. Sometimes that gift is a little bit of our time helping somebody else in that community, right? In honor of the ancestors we're connecting with. So I love that. I think all that's a wonderful point.
I'm building on what Brandon said. I say this many, many times because I get this. I'm a spiritualist, and so I get this message many, many times for people. You, every one of us, when I say you, I mean all of us, are the culmination of something that is beyond your ancestors' wildest dreams. Your ancestors' wildest dreams are embodied in you. You are more expansive. You are more empowered than many of our ancestors could even imagine. And so what a beautiful thing we are in that lineage and that connection that we get to be that embodiment of our ancestors' dreams, right? My grandparents couldn't read or write. I can read and write, and I'm writing books. You know what I mean? That's like,
yeah, it's wonderful. There's an author, Laura Davila. She just put a book out on brujeria, and she just posted something the other day that was talking about like you are the outcome, the result of every novena, every rosary, every candle lit by your ancestors, and they are so proud of you because you've become what they wanted you to be, which is beautiful. Llewellyn is telling us that we are unfortunately running low on time, but one final question. It says, final note, what is the one thing, only one, that you want folks to know about folk magic? Byron, let's start with you and work our way around.
Well, I want to issue an invitation to everybody to do the following. If you are around your elders, grandparents, great-grandparents, great aunts, whatever, talk to them. And don't use the word magic or witchcraft or any of that, but just say, what are those weird old things that our family used to do? What are our family superstitions? Because that's going to teach you a lot as you read between the lines about what your lineage has honored way before you were there. But be careful with your language about it. So say, what's that weird superstitious stuff again? What is that thing about broken glass in a jar in the window? What's that? Because they are much more likely to tell you a story than if you say, tell me about witchcraft in the family.
Yes, absolutely. Lilith, what about you?
I think I would say, what did you learn that you now have to relearn? I mean, I think there's so many things that we were growing up that we were taught, both good and bad, that this is the way you do it. This is what you don't do. And sort of unpacking that now as an adult, now as somebody who is a person that understands there's more than just what we were taught in the history books. There's her story. There's my ancestors' stories. There's all these stories that didn't get told, and all this magic and powerful ways of doing things that we didn't really understand. And now we can look at it with new eyes. So that for me is one of my favorite things to do. What do I know inherently, and how does that better my life? And how can I continue to share that with people and my descendants and my students and everyone around me?
Beautiful. That's beautiful. I love that. Brandon, what about you?
I think for me, the folk magic is not a museum exhibit. Folk magic is alive. It is a living tradition, and every practitioner builds upon the tradition. Every practitioner adds to it, and every practitioner evolves it. So don't think just because my practices don't fit with the big picture practices that I think are part of this tradition, that you still have a place there, and you still have a place to evolve the practice based upon what you like to do and your connection to the practice. So evolve it. Don't just put it in a glass case.
Absolutely. Yeah. The living tradition. Absolutely. For sure. Pamita, what about you?
I would say that all of us are intrepid explorers. There is everything is magic. One example of that is we have a book, let's say a book about herbal magic. Maybe there's 500 plants in there. There are 300,000 different species of plants in the world. Do you think only those 500 are magic and the rest are just filler? No way. They are all magic. And so all of us get to explore and discover and find out what those 200 and 900 million, whatever the plants, we get to explore what those mean and the magic in them. So what a wonderful thing. We get to be explorers. This is amazing.
I love that. And yeah, that ties into what I would say, which is remember the wonder that you pursued as a child, right? That the world was a wonderful place at some point. There was magic out there. If you pursue that, you're going to find these threads, these folk magic, which is the other thing I'll leave you with is get red thread. If there's one thing all of us know, it's find some red thread. You're going to need it, right? Somewhere along the line. I think that's going to be it for us. It looks like people are saying goodbye and farewell. And just thanks everybody for attending and coming out today. And this has been great. I love all of you. You're fantastic. Yeah.
Mutual. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all so much.